Hello, I'm going to show a quick video about how to use ProcMod to generate a geometric level, and using this old but beautiful game called Qbert. You can see that if you remember, it was just a very basic game moving a player on the squares, and you had to jump on top of each one without dying or jumping off the edge. So that's the basic gist of it, and we're going to use ProcMod to generate one of those levels automatically for us. So I'm going to create a cube, and the way that I usually set up map modules is that it always has its own root object that really doesn't have anything on it. I'm going to put that at 0, 0, 0, and make sure the scale is at 1, and put it on its own layer, just that root object. And I'm going to give it its own box collider and make that box collider just slightly smaller than the extents of the mesh. I usually do that just because a lot of times I want my mesh to be able to slightly intersect other portions of the map, just so that there's no space between them. And then I'm going to name that module and save it as a prefab. So now I'm going to go to the Create menu, ProcMod System, and my computer had a glitch there. And there we go. It's compiling. And I'm going to create a new module and attach the prefab to that. And I'm going to change the module collision layer to that layer that I chose for the map module. So now you'll notice that as soon as you did that, or you do that with the prefab, adding it to the module system, then it'll get a tag onto your prefab, a map module tag. So now you can start connecting your prefabs in the possible ways that it can connect with other modules or with itself. So in this case, we only have one, so I'm going to duplicate it. And before I move it, I'm going to double check my grid settings. I'm going to move in one unit in every direction and make sure I'm in global mode, hold control, and then just move these into place. And so now when I select two of them, when you have gizmos on, and if this gizmo is too large or too small, you can go to the ProcMod system and change this Gizmo Scale, and that will change the scale. And that just indicates, and you can move this to change the position that the junction is going to be created when you're creating a new one. So when we click connect, we can see that it actually created two junctions on the prefab, obviously because we're connecting it to itself. So it connected it down here and up here. So geometrically you can see why that makes sense. So I'm just going to duplicate it again and move it down to the left and do pretty much the same thing. But when I select the two, it will by default highlight in pink and also draw a line between the two junctions that it's going to connect if you do connect it. So obviously, and it chooses the ones that are closest to each other, but we want to create a new one here, which will create a new junction at the top and the bottom over here as well. So I'm just going to do create new on both and move this little gizmo. Sorry, that's a little bit of a bug I need to fix so that it by default goes to where it needs to be. So I'll move that there and click connect. So now we've got 4 connections, which means that it can spawn modules in any of these places. But so obviously we want to be able to spawn them over to the side, so I'm going to duplicate again and just move this to the side, and then do the same thing, create new on both, and move that to where I want it to create one, and click connect. So now I have a situation where it should be able to expand really in all directions. So I'm going to delete all the modules, then just go to the system and change the spans to something like 3 and click generate. So that is what I'm going to point out here is really the way that the system generates the map is just by going through each one of the connections and expanding it out, basically selecting a random module from the ones that are connected, and then if the spans hasn't, been exceeded, then it will do it again. So you can see really what that does by just clicking expand. It will continue to generate and expand the map from all of the junctions. So because our object is the same, it's only one object and it's the same size, then it's going to have an exact shape. So if we wanted to add, a variety into this, we could add different sized shapes to that, and I won't get into that, but because I want to show how to generate or how to spawn a random player location. So to do that, I'm going to just create an empty game object. Actually, I'll just start with a sphere and kind of do the same thing, and I'll call this player, and this is actually totally just fine as it is, so I'm just going to create a new detail module. I'm sorry, create the prefab and then connect the prefab object. Alright, and I'm going to instantiate just one of the modules and connect the two, but I want to create a new junction and I want it to be on top here. So that's going to connect the player, and I usually do also like to call it a detail so that I know the difference between the two. So you can connect details to module junctions, obviously, and what that will do when you detail a map or when you call this spawn details function, if the map is done expanding, then it will spawn details at any unpopulated node outside of the map. So that's that. So now it's possible to spawn a player on top of any of the blocks, but obviously I want to only spawn it on one of them. So I'm going to choose a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1 for this module detail here, and then generate a map. And now I'll just choose to spawn details, and it will randomly choose a spot out of any of them to spawn that player into, or that object. So you can use this to obviously, generate random enemies that might be throughout the level. And I mean, say this wasn't a player, say this was an enemy, you can say a maximum of 3, but you don't really want it to spawn on every single one. Well, I suppose if you do a maximum of 3, then it will spawn 3 in 3 random places. That could be fine. But say you didn't want to have a maximum, but you really only wanted a chance that it would spawn, you can turn this usage weight down. So that will, oops. Oh, okay, so the usage weight actually will be the chance to spawn this among all of the possible details. So if you wanted to have, a possibility to have 5 different enemies, then you would connect all 5 enemies to that junction, and then this would determine how likely it would be for that specific one to be there. So if you wanted to have a maximum, then obviously you would still use that total maximum to go between. So that's the basic setup. Sorry, pretty quick, but that's all I got for you. Let me know if that helps. Thanks.